So Simple tutorial. Good morning students. Welcome to SST So Simple tutorial. In the previous class we had discussed arenas of the Cold War and Cold War timeline. Today we are going to discuss challenge to bipolarity. In this topic we are basically going to discuss about NAM, non-aligned movement. This topic students views the non-aligned movement as a challenge to the dominance of the two superpowers. So far we have seen how the Cold War was dividing the whole world into two rival alliances. It was in this situation India and many other countries of Asia, Africa and Latin America got freedom from their colonial powers. This is where non-alignment offered a third option to these newly independent countries to stay away out of the alliances by not joining any of them. Let us first see who the founders of NAM were. India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, Egypt leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, Yugoslavia's Josip Broz Tito, Indonesia's Sukarno, and Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. These five leaders are called the founders of NAM. This movement had its origin in Bandung, Indonesia, where President Sukarno hosted a conference of Asian and African countries in 1955. It was attended by 29 Asian and African countries. But the non-aligned movement as an organization was founded on the Brijuni Islands in Yugoslavia in 1956. In 1956, Tito, Nehruji and Nasser met to assess the impact of Bandung Conference and discuss their vision for a non-aligned force. These ideas later took shape into the non-aligned movement. Indonesia's Sukarno and Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah strongly supported them. However, the first official non-aligned summit was held 5 years later in Belgrade in 1961 under the leadership of Tito, Nasser, Nehruji, Kwame Nkrumah and Sukarno. Belgrade was the capital of Yugoslavia till 2006. Students, Yugoslavia does not exist today. Belgrade is in Serbia today. Okay. The summit was attended by 25 member states and observers from 3 other countries. At this conference, a 27-point declaration was adopted in which they urged the superpowers to maintain peace and security in the world. They condemned colonialism in all forms. An appeal was made for total disarmament. Also, an invitation was extended to the Asian and African countries to be a part of the non-aligned movement. The membership of NAM thereafter kept growing. In the 17th summit that was held in Venezuela in 2016, there were 120 member states and 17 observer states. This was a clear indication that the countries were attracted towards the principles of non-alignment. Let us see some important objectives of NAM. The objectives of non-aligned movement has been laid off at the first summit itself. Some of the chief objectives were to uproot imperialism and colonialism, to promote international peace and security, complete disarmament, especially strong opposition to nuclear arms, to end racial discrimination, and of course, apartheid, effective cooperation with the United Nations in its peace efforts. Let us now see the meaning of non-alignment. As non-alignment grew into a popular international movement, countries of various different political systems and interests joined it. This made the movement less homogeneous and made it difficult to define in precise terms. In general, it meant not to support any group. In other words, staying away from any side. This staying away is often considered as isolationism or neutrality, which is not correct. Staying away should not be considered isolationism or neutrality. Students, non alignment is not isolationism. Isolationism means keeping oneself aloof from the world affairs, non involvement in the world affairs. For example, see the case of America. The policy that was followed by the US since the American War of Independence in 1787 till the beginning of the First World War is isolationism. America had isolated herself from the world affairs, whereas the non aligned countries, including India, played an active role in mediating between the two rival alliances for the cause of peace and stability. Also, non alignment is not neutrality. See, to know right and wrong and then not to side with anybody is neutrality. But to differentiate between the right and wrong and support the right is non alignment. Neutral states simply stay out of war. They neither get involved in wars nor take any positions on the appropriateness or morality of a war. They are not even required to help end a war. Non aligned states, including India, were actually involved in wars but for various reasons. They also worked to prevent war between other countries and tried to end wars that had broken out. Thus, non alignment is an active and independent policy. A non aligned country keeps herself away from narrow groupism, which is a danger to world peace. A non aligned country does not become puppet of any powerful nation. According to this policy, friendly relations can be established with independent nations and active role can be played in international politics. I hope you have understood this concept. If yes, allow me to go to the next small topic, New International Economic Order, NIEO. Before we proceed to NIEO, I think you must have an understanding of 1. What is International Economic Order, and 2. What was the existing economic order. International Economic Order means, my dear students, existing relationship between different countries of the world. So, International Economic Order is essentially the relationship between the developing and the developed countries of the world. So, what was the existing International Economic Order then? If we understand them, we can understand why a new International Economic Order was necessary. The International Economic Order consists of categories of developed, developing, and underdeveloped economies. Today, the level of interdependence has increased, bringing into sharp focus the disparities and inequalities that exist between such economies. The developed countries, including the USA, Japan, Britain, and other countries of the Western Europe, had become industrialized in the 19th century. Their need for raw materials and markets were fulfilled by the colonies they had established in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America were thoroughly exploited under their colonial rule. Their economies became appendages of these countries. So, when they gained independence after the Second World War, they were backward in almost every sphere. After the Second World War, there was a tremendous technological advancement in developed countries. They were in a position to take advantage of this to further develop their industries. The developing countries, on the other hand, had to overcome their backwardness. They had to first develop basic infrastructural facilities. For further advancement, they were totally dependent on the developed countries which had the required technical know-how. Thus, in international transactions, the less developed countries and the underdeveloped countries were and even today are at a disadvantage. The terms of trade were not in favor, which led to increase in disparity. Therefore, it was essential to establish more equitable terms of trade which alone could create a better world order. I hope this much of background will be enough for you to catch up the topic NIEO. At the first summit of NAM in 1961, economic issues were not given much importance. But by the mid 1970s, economic issues gained importance. It was non-aligned movement that first raised the demand for the establishment of the new international economic order. It was the NAM that initiated the economic development of the LDCs, that is least developed countries, under the head of NIEO. If you see the members of the NAM, majority of them were newly independent nations. They had got freedom from their colonial masters but not from their poverty, hunger or low level of economic development. They were economically very backward. That is why they were called LDC, least developed countries. Therefore, to develop economically and lift their people out of poverty was a great challenge before these countries. But the world economic order they found themselves in was based on gross inequalities and exploitation. They realized that along with political independence, sustainable economic development was necessary. Otherwise, their countries would remain dependent on the richer countries which were once a colonial power that had ruled them. With this realization, my dear students, originated the idea of NIEO. So these countries, that is the LDCs, utilized all platforms G77, the UNCTAD, that is UNCTAD, the non-aligned conferences, and the General Assembly of the United Nations to raise their issues. In the 1970s, these countries succeeded in passing a UN resolution on the new international economic order. So NIEO was basically a set of proposals which was put forward by the third world countries through the UNCTAD, that is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in the 1970s. UNCTAD is a UN body which is meant to support developing countries in accessing the benefits of a globalized economy. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development brought out a report in 1972 entitled Towards a New Trade Policy for Development. The report proposed a reform of the global trading system so as to give the LDCs real control over their natural resources, which were hitherto exploited by the developed Western countries, to obtain access to Western markets so that the LDCs could sell their products and therefore make trade more beneficial for the poorer countries. This is how they would get fairer prices for their raw materials. Then, to reduce the cost of technology from the Western countries. Students, technology is the key driver of economic growth of any country or region. And there was a gap in the technological advancement of the Western and developing countries. And the technology that came from the developing countries came at high prices. So they wanted a reduction in the cost of import of technology. What else? To promote a greater role in international economic institutions. You already know that the post-war international economic system was the Bretton Woods system, where IMF and World Bank had a major role to play. Decision making in these institutions even today is controlled by the Western powers. So they wanted representation of their voice, that is voice of the third world in these institutions. As a result, NAM became an economic pressure group. However, by the late 1980s, the NIEO initiative began to fade. What were the reasons? The most important reason being stiff opposition from the developed countries. The developed countries were strongly united. They were unrelenting to accept this idea. They believed that the existing system had no problems and the LDCs will benefit from the same system as the developed countries are benefiting. On the other hand, the non-aligned countries were struggling to maintain their unity against the opposition of developed countries. So this was all about the NAM and the NIEO. I hope you must have understood the topic properly. So let me stop here. In the next class, we will discuss India, of course, as a leader of NAM and the Cold War. Till then, read your books and have a nice time. Thank you.